The hosts and guests on Everything's Messy podcast are not licensed healthcare professionals. The discussions in our episodes are not personalized medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider for medical guidance. Never delay seeking professional medical advice or emergency assistance because of our podcast. We encourage consulting with a healthcare professional before making any significant health changes. By listening to our podcast, you agree to the disclaimer. Thank you for listening to Everything's Messy podcast. Hey, welcome to Everything's Messy podcast, where we celebrate the beautiful but messy life experiences that most, if not all, people go through. Get ready to embark on an exciting journey through the raw and unfiltered stories of everyday people. Here, we dive into messy realities of life, from making messy mistakes to triumphs and everything in between. Are you sensing a theme? That's right, it's messy. But this just isn't about the mess. It's about finding strength and resilience in the midst of it all. We'll explore how health, fitness, and wellness play a crucial role in navigating life's twists and very messy turns. And we'll challenge conventional systems, because sometimes the most unconventional paths lead to the greatest discoveries. Join us as we embrace the messy, beautiful, and endlessly fascinating stories. Each episode is a testament to the power of our messy journeys and the beauty that emerges from the mess. So grab your favorite beverage, coffee, sparkling water, whatever it may be, and prepare to be inspired. Are you ready? Let's get messy. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Everything's Messy podcast. I am your messy host, Sarah. So joining me today, I have a really great guest, Amber Abila. She's a binge eating expert. She helps women stop binge eating and overeating by rewiring their brains so they can feel, I always do quotation, normal, because what is normal, and in control around any food. Through coaching and psychology, she learned that there was nothing wrong with her, which I love. And she just needed simple brain tools to start making dramatic shifts in her eating habits and life, which I think is such a great way to kick off this messy episode. Welcome, Amber.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me on today.
Yeah, I think this is a topic that, especially women, we're sort of bombarded with how we eat, what we eat, when we eat, what we do at a very young age that sort of, catapults us into adulthood. And, we talked before I hit record for a minute just about how, it's our fault. We don't have enough discipline, or we just need to try harder, or we're not doing the right things. We need to, try this diet or try that diet. And really, you're telling us, no, that's not what it is. Can you tell us a little bit about that first? And then I want to come to your messy story.
Yeah, so I think it'll kind of entwine in with my messy story because I do this today. I always joke not because I thought it was a fun career, although I do love it as my dream career, but because I struggled with binge eating myself for a long, long time. And I really tried all the traditional things that were suggested to me. I tried going to therapy. I tried intermittent fasting. I tried calling a friend, taking a bubble bath, increasing my protein, increasing my water, working out more, like all of these traditional things I tried, and none of them worked for me. And that's when I really started to feel broken around food because I thought, if none of this is working, like what else is left for me? But that's
Right.
where I went out and had to find my own solutions around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting. I think as women, we're sort of told we're kind of broken from the beginning, right? We have all of these things, hormones, puberty, like all these things that we have to deal with. And then you're left with this, whether it's societal or environmental, all the things around eating and what that encompasses, right? And so then you start to feel like I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. I'm not as motivated as my best friend is, or I don't have the discipline as so and so does. When really you're saying, no, look, people are struggling with this all over. And it's something like hardwired in our brain that is, whether I think, there's expression, the comfort food or dealing with stress that way, whatever that is, that's what we've picked up to do, and how did you, let's start there with your messy story. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that you had a problem with it, and then how did you pull yourself out of it?
Yeah, so my journey started around 2015 when I decided I wanted to lose a little bit of weight. And so I Googled how you lose weight, and the first thing that comes up, calories in, calories out. That's what most of us are taught. So I downloaded my fitness pal. It popped out my
Yep.
perfect number that I was going to follow and be perfect with. And I did for a little bit. It worked for a little bit, and I did start to lose weight. And I thought, great, like I'm at my goal weight, like things will just be good from here on out. But it didn't end there. I remember my first binge was around Christmas time. And I went downstairs and there was Christmas cookies out, and I promised myself I was just gonna have one. And then I started having one, and I felt like I was almost a ghost in my body where I just like left it and I had another and another and another until I had had 7 cookies. And I was so panicked at that time. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that just happened." And that was also the first time I purged and I threw up. So I also struggled with bulimia for a time period. And that's what really motivated me to think, I need to get help for this. It was impacting my daily life. I knew there was a lot of negative consequences, both from the binge eating, but also the purging. So I first went to a specific eating disorder therapist, which is where I think people first go to if they're struggling with this and they're like, I want to take this psychological approach out.
Sure.
So like I knew that, okay, dieting probably wasn't great for me. Like I was going to figure this out. But I felt like in therapy, it was a lot of trying to like figure out this mystery trauma that I probably had. And I actually had a really great childhood and there wasn't much there to unpack, honestly. I think we all have a little something, but I didn't see how it correlated with my
Sure. Sure.
relationship with food. And so what I decided to do was like, I got to do my own research because I've been in therapy for a year and nothing has really changed. I feel like I've got more awareness maybe around my eating habits, but I kind of feel like I'm still at square
Sure.
one. So I started doing my own research and I started learning about our brain and how our habits work. So essentially, what I started learning was that, and I got to like over page 50 on Google. Like I was like, I remember deep diving research every night of my life trying to figure out
Wow.
to this.
That's deep.
Yeah. And for most people who are struggling with food, on the rare occasion, there is some people who have some trauma associated with it, primarily sexual trauma. And that is a good
Sure.
thing to work with a therapist on.
Sure.
But 99% of people that I see and that I talk to this about, it started from a history of dieting. So what happens when we diet is our brain does not know the difference between a juice cleanse and a famine happening on planet Earth. It just thinks food is disappearing, and because beyond water,
Right.
food is our most essential thing for survival, of course it's going to panic. So when your brain sends out these strong urges to eat when you're restricting, it is actually the most normal thing for your brain to do. That is a very healthy sign that your brain is functioning properly because it's trying to keep you alive. Like, woohoo, go you, go
Right.
great, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't know that we're trying to like lose weight and get hot by our vacation on the beach this summer. It just knows that, oh my gosh, food is going away. So then we start binge eating. A lot of times we're binge eating on these hyper palatable foods, which we can talk about, like the flavorings in these foods and how they basically, to our brain, they perceive more nutrition than there's actually in them. So we start binge eating on these foods, and then it kind of becomes linked in as a habit because our brain now thinks it's necessary to survive. So that's what started happening to me, is that even though I'd stopped dieting, I was eating like 3,000 calories a day. I'm like, I'm clearly getting in enough. I was eating fairly healthy. I was like, well, why am I still binge eating on top of all of this? And that was because at that point, my brain had taken this in as this must be something that I need to do to survive, and link that in as a habit. And so I needed to learn to create safety in my brain in order to make it see that I'm not dieting anymore, I'm not restricting anymore, and also start to learn that binge eating isn't pleasurable. So a big messaging in the kind of eating disorder therapy community is that binge eating is helping you cope in some way. And that's kind of like this emotional eating side of things. And emotional eating, like, it can be a real thing. However, I don't think it's as big of a deal as most people make it out to be. But what's happening then is, as we start to form this habit around it and our brain starts to think like this is what's safe, we need to show it that this habit actually isn't pleasurable. Because when we're telling ourselves this thing is pleasurable, it's enjoyable, it's helping us cope in some way, that it makes it so much harder to give up. And, there is some truth to it is, giving you this like little hit of dopamine, especially in the beginning stages when you're expecting this reward to come in.
Sure.
But binge
Yeah.
eating only and always made my life significantly worse. It never made it better. Never after a binge was I was like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. That was a great idea. And so
Oh, I feel so much better.
yeah. What really helped me is starting to view binge eating as just this habit that I didn't need to do anymore. And that really simplified my recovery, but also showing my brain how this was never pleasurable and that eating large amounts of these foods only and always caused me pain.
That's very intuitive. And I think also too, you talk about specific foods. We know we're learning now that some of these foods have addictive chemicals in it, and it makes us come back for more. And like the salt they put on the McDonald's French fries, and how it's all supposed to be making you coming back for more, and all these kinds of things. When you add that into the mix of this synapses that you've basically connected in your brain of this is pleasurable. I need this. I need more of it. I need more of it. Now you've got like the deck stacked against you, right?
Mhm. What I find that's missing from the conversation, though, on foods being addictive is why they are addictive. It's not because they like hijack over our body and we just like can't stop eating them. It's on the surface, it might feel like that. It feels like we're really out of control around them. But what research has found is that true like food addiction is not really a real thing. It's kind of like scientists have gone back and forth about it, but we can't say it's for sure as similar as a thing as something like cocaine addiction is, which is what sugar oftentimes gets compared to. Yeah. So
Right, but even with the chemicals that we know that are in processed food that we know that are addictive, you don't think that plays a key part in it?
so the reason that they feel addictive is because of the way our body learns to source nutrition. So I'm going to back up a little bit here. The four most common ingredients in our food system
Okay.
are sugar, salt, water, and natural flavors. If you flip over a package of something, you're probably going to find some of those things on it. We've heard a lot about sugar. Salt itself does not actually make things taste better. It's when the salt has been modified that it makes things, salt can makes things taste better, but for good reason, because we actually need salt. It's an essential nutrient that we will die if we do not have. So it's a reason we like salt.
Right.
But what I want to talk
Right.
about is natural flavors, and we can also talk about sugar and how that fits into this definition. What natural flavors are isolated molecules that have all of the flavor but none of the actual food or nutrition. And it can be like a combination of things. So for example, if you see something that has natural strawberry flavor on the label, it could be extracted from tree bark and leaves. It doesn't have to be extracted from the actual strawberry plant. It's just extracted from the natural world, versus artificial flavors are just created in a lab. You think like blue raspberry, there's no blue raspberries that exist in nature. That was just made up. But there's really not a whole lot of difference between natural and artificial flavors in the way that our body processes them. And why they can be a problem is not necessarily because natural flavors themselves are addictive or ruining our health or causing cancer or any of these things, but because of how our body perceives and uses flavor. So for thousands of years, humans have survived without hardly any nutritional knowledge. We didn't know that vitamins existed until the 1910s. Right? That is only about 100 years ago, and humans have been along a
Right.
lot longer than that. Now you might think, oh, well, they had scurvy and things back then. But a lot of times vitamin deficiencies happen because they didn't have enough access to a large enough variety of foods. Scurvy only happened because people were sailing without fruits and vegetables, but they reported getting extremely strong cravings for fruits and vegetables. So their body was letting them know we need this, but nothing was coming in. So our nutritional wisdom has guided us for thousands of years. We did not survive as humans this long by just like willy-nilly picking whatever berry we found, hoping that we, get the right nutrients. We have cravings for a reason. And a lot of women notice this around their period, for example, when they're like, oh, I'm really craving like a steak right now. It's just craving the iron. So our taste buds can't actually taste all of the nutrients that are in our food. So let's use a strawberry, for example. Let's say you eat a strawberry. Your taste buds can taste that it's like a sweet food, but all of the other good things in it, such as vitamin C, it doesn't recognize this until vitamin C arrives in our gut. And then our brain can say, oh, I'm going to make a prediction. Next time I taste strawberry, I'm going to predict that I'm getting strawberry nutrition coming in. I'm getting vitamin C and all the other things that are in strawberries. But what's been happening is that as natural flavors have been injected into, you will be so surprised. I want you to go through your cabinets, everyone, after this, and just flip it over and see how many things. Like our pasta sauce has natural flavors in it. I had this like little dried fruit bar that was 100% dried fruit with added natural flavors. Like it's truly in everything. And the reason that's a problem is because...
Well, and what's sad about that Go ahead. I was just going to say what's sad about that is they don't have to disclose exactly what is in the natural flavors. That's where the
Mhm.
breakdown, I think, becomes.
Yes, they don't have to disclose it, but let's think, okay, now, for example, right, normally you eat a strawberry, you get the strawberry nutrition. Your body knows, hey, if I'm low on vitamin C, let's crave a strawberry or let's crave an orange. Now, let's say you're having strawberry flavored gummy bears that don't have any of the actual strawberry nutrition in it. What happens then is your taste buds, they taste the strawberry on the gummy bears and they think, wow, I must be getting like 100 strawberries right now because this is a really hyper intensified strawberry flavor. And then you think, wow, I'm going to get 100 units of strawberry nutrition. That's why gummy bears taste good to us. It's not because that, we're just addicted to sugar. It's because our taste buds are perceiving that a large volume of nutrition is coming in. And I think a really easy way to see this is with soda, for example. A lot of people, so soda, for example, is something that a lot of people feel addicted to. They feel like it's so hard to quit. But no one has ever come to me saying they're addicted to sugar water. It's not the sugar in the soda. It's the fact that the sugar has been paired with all of these different flavorings. People in the soda industry, they will go to these exotic fruit orchards and these crazy islands, and they'll extract out these natural and artificial flavors that they create in the lab and put them in the soda. And again, why they feel addictive is not just because of the sugar. Otherwise, everyone would be going around just chugging sugar water all day, and that no one's doing that. But it's because to our taste buds, it is being perceived as a large volume of nutrition is coming in, and that's something that could be beneficial to our survival. So it's really this understanding of how our body has learned historically to source and find nutrition that I think is missing from this conversation on why we feel so out of control around these foods at times.
That's incredibly fascinating. And the way that you broke that down was amazing. And I'm not sure that people are actually hearing and or having this conversation, because that's incredibly important, the distinctions that you're making as to how we're becoming addicted, or just wanting to continue to supply our body with all of these extra mega doses of what we think we're getting when we're really not. And so that, just having that little piece of information, the light bulb kind of goes off and you're like, oh, okay, so now I see the challenge, right? And so then we come over to the solution box. And so how do we, other than knowing this awareness now, how do we break that cycle?
Yeah, so I'll say one other thing with like sugar, for example, because that's what we started with. To think about, is like, okay, well, where's sugar in this play? Because we know that natural flavors, again, it's not that natural flavors themselves are toxic, but it's how they confuse our body and like lie to us about what's actually in our food. Sugar itself is this isolated molecule of sucrose when we're thinking about traditional table sugar. The problem is not sucrose. The problem is that we're eating sucrose as an isolated molecule. So, let's say that you were to have an apple with honey mixed into it. It would taste like a honey flavored apple, right? You would be able to taste that this has honey on it. And that's usually why we don't use it in like baking, or same thing with maple syrup, because it has a strong flavor to it. Sucrose is flavorless. Basically, whatever you mix it into, it just kind of dissolves into the flavor. So you think about, let's say you were to make an apple and you were to make it into kind of like a stew, so the sugar dissolves, it would taste like a stronger flavored apple. It wouldn't taste like a sugar flavored apple. It just tastes like sweeter apple. So the problem with sugar is the fact that
That's why we love apple pie.
exactly. The problem with sugar then is because it doesn't have the flavoring associated with it, because it's become so isolated from the source. If we were all out here snacking on sugar cane all day, it wouldn't be that much of a problem because we wouldn't like it so much. You'd probably have a little bit of it, and then you'd kind of be like, all right, I'm done munching on my sugar cane. I'm good with it. So it's because it's become an isolated thing that intensifies the flavor of what it's with. So again, you think about in nature, we go into nature, it's like, wow, a super sweet apple. This must be better for our survival. It's going to have more nutrients. And that's what sugar makes us think about the foods that it's paired with. So the solution to this then is to start to, one, have the awareness around it, and start to understand that like your brain is not broken. It is doing what any normal brain would do. And to stop binge eating, it's kind of like a two-part solution. The first thing we need to do is to stop restricting, and that's stop restricting both calories and food groups. And then the other part of that is to look at it from this, to basically change our mindset around foods and to look at it from this psychological lens. So we can start with restriction. How I define restriction, because this word gets thrown out a lot nowadays of like, don't restrict, like eat enough. And yes, that's true, but I think we need to narrow that down a little bit more. Restriction, like true restriction, is not giving yourself enough of something that you truly need. We can think about this in the example of water. If you were to say, I'm only allowed to have 2 glasses of water today, that would be restricting yourself because you're going to need water. And then the next time you drink water, you're probably going to binge on it and go crazy on it because you're super thirsty. What is not restriction is saying no to a glass of wine or a margarita, because we do not need a glass of wine or a margarita to survive. So that is loving self-care and boundaries. So it's the same thing with food. Calories and nutrients are something that we need to survive. So putting restrictions around those is something that can lead us to later binge eating. But saying no to gummy bears is not restriction. That can be self-care because we do not need anything in gummy bears to survive. We could get our source of carbs and sugar elsewhere from fruit and honey and maple syrup and other foods that exist outside of it. So I think starting there first is looking at my general guideline is if it existed 100 years ago, you're all good to eat it. Like even things like pasta and bread, there are some like nuances with that because of the way we've like hyper processed bread in flour in our country.
Sure.
But you think about like Italians have been eating pasta and bread forever and ever and ever, and they've been fine. They've been healthy. They've been thin. Same thing with Asian cultures. They've been eating rice 3 times a day, large portions of it every single day, and they have very lean, thin people that are very healthy. So it's not like the carbs or the pasta or the bread, it's the way that we're processing those things. And oftentimes the things with like flour is it's more that flour is oftentimes like at the crime scene per se, where there's all these other additives that are confusing our body, and those additives are more the problem versus the added flours and things itself.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, especially because there seems to be a high sensitivity to gluten, even if there's not celiac, a lot of people are sensitive. And basically what you're saying is you're sensitive to the additives that are added to the flour, or that the flour is cut before it's actually ripe to where it needs to be, all these other things that we're doing just to make the production of it and all of those things. What is curious to me is, because that's a lot of information, like to just become self-aware and process that. How can you simplify that for somebody who sort of is, they're thinking they're the problem. They're thinking they've tried everything. We mentioned about self-discipline and, oh, you're not trying hard enough, or you just need to be motivated. And those are synapses that we've made in our brain as well. So how can we rewire and then connect that basically to our self-worth to then make it almost like give permission to not have a struggle with it? Because my other follow-up question to that would be, some people deal and struggle and are challenges with this on an extreme spectrum, and there are others that don't seem to be that affected by it. Like, what do we do with that?
The degree that someone is binge eating is usually impacted by the level of hunger they're experiencing. So the harder someone has been dieting and the more food groups they've been cutting out and the stricter they've been, the more disordered, in quotes, I'll say that things tend to be. Because what can help us have compassion for ourselves during this is understanding that every single human behavior can be understood in a way that makes sense when we look at it from how this benefits our survival, or how we perceive it benefiting our survival. Food is, when we look at, oh my gosh, all the years of dieting that we've done and all the crazy food rules and restrictions that we've given ourselves, it actually makes a lot of sense on why our brain feels like it needs to overdo it now in order to protect us and make sure we get enough. It also makes a lot of sense when there's so many different rules and advice and diets and influencers and people out there who are telling us 10 million different things a day that we feel really confused, and then we just throw our hands up in the air and you're like, you know what, I give up. I'm just gonna eat whatever I want. Who cares? I'm just gonna be this way forever. So it makes sense because that requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of brain power. And so when people are like, I just don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to think about it anymore, that also makes sense from a survival perspective. So if you ask yourself, how might this behavior be perceived as trying to help me? Because remember, like, it's not actually helping us if it's causing more pain than pleasure in our life, but we can look at it from this compassionate understanding of this is how this behavior is like attempting to make my survival odds better.
Well, yeah, and then you have that saying of, if your body isn't getting what it needs, it hangs on to the fat that it has. So then it becomes that much more difficult to shed the weight or lose the weight because it's holding on. It's going to pull from those fat reserves because you're not giving it the nutrients that it needs. So then it proves rather difficult to lose the weight because it's hanging on to the fat that it has.
Yeah, exactly. Then the second part of this that I'll go into is the psychology around letting go of these foods and these habits, because we can know, like, logically, like, okay, yeah, I can see how these foods are confusing my body, how it's like kind of hijacking my craving. It's making me crave things that don't actually have the nutrition that I want. But now what do we do? So one of my favorite things that I do in my coaching, because I also integrate aspects of hypnosis into my coaching. I'm certified in coaching the unconscious brain. So we go to like the deeper layers of what might actually be going on. And that's what I call telling yourself the whole story. So most of us tell ourselves like, chapter 1, the food tastes good, the end. It's great. But that's not what happens. It's like, okay, chapter 1, we eat the ice cream and then we feel this intense craving for more. And then next thing you know, we've left our body. We feel out of control. We're frantically eating the Ben& Jerry's. The Ben& Jerry's is gone. Now we're overwhelmed with guilt. We're feeling heavy the rest of the night. We can't do any of the laundry that we wanted to do because we're sitting there beating ourselves up. We don't sleep well. And then the next day we're tired. We spend all day at work Googling how to stop binge eating and getting to page 50 like Amber did. Like all of these things that happen.
And then just yeah.
Yes. And so all of these things that happen after the fact, we forget to tell ourselves until they happen. So I imagine in our brain, like imagine us taking 2 paths. Imagine us taking that path. Okay, we eat the first couple bites and then all of this happens and then, la da 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 da. And then I say, okay, let's imagine taking path 2. Path 2 is where we get this urge to do the behavior and we sit with it. We don't act on it. So a little bit about urges in our cravings. Urges, I describe them as the emotion of over desire. They are too much desire for something. A normal level of desire is like eating food when we're hungry. We are supposed to desire food. Desire for food is a normal thing. But when we start desiring food when we are already full and we are no longer hungry, then that's when it becomes a problem because food can't solve anything when we're not hungry. So from there, we're like, okay, if we have too much desire for food, why might this be? And that's oftentimes, again, maybe because we have broken this flavor and nutrition relationship in our body. It's because it started to become a habit, but because we're perceiving it as pleasurable, all of these things. And when we sit with an urge, that's our opportunity to rewire our brain. So anytime we do something, it's like taking a check mark in our brain. And anytime we don't do something, it's like taking a check mark in another part of our brain to not do that thing. So I give people some reminders, and this is I take people through this in my guided audio to stop a binge, which we'll have in the show notes for you guys. Where it's basically like this guided meditation where I walk you through this process so you can actually like close your eyes and get comfortable and do this. But I give you some reminders about urges because urges are 3 things. They are harmless, they are powerless, and they are meaningless. What this means is that they can't hurt you. They're just thoughts going through your head that are creating some sensations in your body. Might feel a little uncomfortable, but you can handle discomfort. We all handle discomfort every single day to some degree. So they can't hurt you. They're powerless, meaning they can't make you act. My favorite example of this is something like people can actually do is if you put your hands under your legs and you're like sitting on them, you can sit here and think all day long about eating food, the chocolate downstairs, the Ben& Jerry's, the Lay's chips. You're not going to actually eat until you sit here and you think with your higher brain, the part of you that's in charge of your motor functions, lift up my hands and go grab the food. So that's a good reminder that we're in charge of our actions, which is something we all learn from the time we're 2 years old as a toddler. We learn that we don't hit people. We're in charge of our hands and to keep our hands to ourselves. So it's a good reminder to ourselves that,
Right.
no matter how strong the cravings feel, we're not going to actually act on it until we give the okay and say, yes, this is a choice that I want to make. And then finally, they're meaningless. Yes, it's good to look at our urges and like get some awareness around them to a certain degree. But I find that a lot of times people are like agonizing over what does this mean? And, does this mean like I have some trauma coming up? And again, maybe, but a lot of times it's just your brain going on like autopilot and repeat that we can just look at it as almost like junk mail, just something we can just like delete and move on with our life from. And then from there, as we start to go through this process, of sitting with our urges and rewiring our brain, it makes it so that the next time we go into a situation or we're around these foods, we don't want it as much because we've now taken that vote in our brain that this isn't something we do anymore and this isn't who we are.
That I love the way that you put that. And really quick, I just want to comment on when we're talking about you brought up the point of controlling our urges, sitting on our hands. We are actually in charge. One of the things you mentioned was discomfort. And I think the body is always trying to be in a place of comfort. Whatever those comfort things are, we're always trying to feed that comfort to our body. I always like to describe this as the toddler in me because I will set boundaries. I will set the discipline. I have the intention and I'll do really good, for the day, for a couple of weeks, for even a couple of months. But then that toddler creeps in and throws a temper tantrum of like, I am tired of this. You're going to feed me what I want. You're going to give in to what I need. And so I always talk about I'm this with the 4-year-old toddler inside me because that expression, hurts so good. You talk about, you're the one who's going to give into it and give it that comfort. But that toddler is screaming at me, I want the Ben and Jerry's at 4 o'clock in the morning, or I want whatever it is. And so when you're able to make that distinction and that discernment of you actually have the power, you talked about we need to rewrite the story because we're only telling us the first chapter. And when you put all of this other information into the full story, then it's like, oh, okay, I can control myself, but am I going to? That's kind of what it leads it to.
Yeah, and Sarah, I appreciate you sharing that example because I think so many of us can relate to that. I know I sure could, where it feels like just like this screaming voice at us that like won't shut up until we eat. And there's two ways to make an urge go away. One of them is eating. When we eat, the urge quiet down. It finally like feels like it goes away. But if you eat when you are getting an urge, you guarantee that it will come back up again because you have now just told your brain that this is something I want to do. This is a behavior I want to have. You've taken that green check mark of saying, thank you, brain. I appreciate you giving me that urge. So yes, it is uncomfortable to, sit with the urge and have it go away, but the urge will always go away if we let it. No one has ever come to me saying, Amber, I've just been dealing with an urge for like 48 hours straight and it just hasn't gone away. Like it does go away. Even if it goes away for a little, it might ebb and flow. We just usually eat so quickly that we don't give it the opportunity to even go away. And so it will go away if we let it, given that we're getting enough calories and nutrition in. If it's coming from a place of like hunger or malnourishment, it's not going to go away because that's your body trying to get its survival needs met. But yeah, I think with this like idea of like this little toddler inside of us, I know gentle parenting is a huge thing nowadays. I want people to think about gentle parenting that inner toddler inside of you. Because imagine if you were to speak with the toddler and just start yelling at them back and say like, you don't get any candy, none for you, you piece of shit, you're too fat. Like, all of these things that we say to ourselves.
Of course, which is the narrative in our head, right?
Yeah, exactly. But instead if we were like, hey, honey, like, I know that you're really craving candy right now. I know that you have been thinking about it all day, but, is there anything else you might need right now? Or can I give you a hug? Or let's just take a couple deep breaths and let's reassess from there and see, oh, maybe you're hungry. Actually, we didn't have very much to eat today. Let's start with, some fruit and some nuts and see how it goes from there and see what we might need.
Protein, right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like having that really gentle voice from ourselves. Something else that I do with clients in coaching sometimes is I just did this with someone the other day. So this gets a little complicated into like the brain science stuff, but basically our brain perceives the things we're thinking about in different modalities. So we hear things, we visualize things, we feel things in certain ways as we're thinking them. So the way you just described this of I feel like there's this toddler inside of me that's screaming. You're describing your internal unconscious experience at that moment in time. And what we can do is this is called like messing with your submodalities or changing your submodalities. By changing how your brain is perceiving that, we can literally change how we feel in that moment. So, what that might look specifically is if I was like coaching you in a session per se, I would have you imagine like that toddler maybe falling asleep inside of you and just like quieting down. You can imagine its voice turning into a soft whisper and floating away. You can imagine its voice changing to something funny. You can imagine its voice turning into Donald Trump or Eeyore or, something abstract that's kind of like funny to your brain to be like, oh, haha, it sounds different now. It doesn't have to be like anything like huge, but just by messing with the way our brain is perceiving this, you'll actually change how you're feeling in that moment. And it will make it so your nervous system calms down because our unconscious brain thinks in images and metaphors. So the way you just described it as a metaphor, that's me letting me know that that's the way your unconscious brain is perceiving it. And that's a very stressful way to perceive it, is like the screaming toddler. And it's like, okay, well, what if we were to imagine putting this toddler to bed or rocking this toddler or giving them a big hug? And you might notice, you're like, oh yeah, that feels a little better when I think about it.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I love your description of that. Um, and it is a battle. It's an internal battle. And you were talking about the things that, in referencing how we're speaking to ourselves and, would we really talk to anybody else that way? Absolutely not. We have that narrative in our brain because we think somehow we have to be tougher. We have to be stricter. We have to be, on point all the time and remember all of these things that we have to do every day on top of eating enough, on top of eating at the right time. And like all of these different things. Yeah. To be just a little more gentler and just, have that compassion for ourselves would probably change a lot. And then it would maybe, I would be like, oh, maybe I don't need that right now or whatever it is. I think part of it though, and the information that you've given today has been extraordinary. I think people, they don't have the science behind it and they go inward and they blame themselves and they think I've tried everything. There's nothing else I can do. And so then that loop, that narrative just keeps going on with them. And you're bringing this and saying, hey, time out. Here's the why. And here's how we can maybe fix that. And I think more people want to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when it comes to self-compassion, a lot of us think that it's like some boring woo-woo thing that we don't really need. We can just try harder and like get it together. But I want you to think about if you had a coworker that you just like didn't really like that much or that like you really just felt indifferent about versus like your BFF, your bestie who is like your ride or die. And I want you to think about how you show up for those two people differently. When it's your bestie's birthday, you're like thinking about her, you want to send her gifts, you want to make sure she has the best day ever. When it's that coworker you really don't like, you're like, you don't even think about them. You hope, I don't know, maybe you kind of half-ass tell them happy birthday, but it's, you're not really showing up for them. This is what happens when we tell ourselves, like, I'm just going to beat myself into change, is we start to treat ourselves like someone we hate, which means we're not going to go to the gym. We're not going to buy the groceries for ourselves and meal prep. We're not going to put ourselves to bed on time. We're not going to do the things that you would do for someone you love. Versus like when you love your BFF, you want like to do nice things for them and to make sure that they have the best. Or you think about a beloved pet. You're like, oh my gosh, like your beloved pet, you might want to give them some treats every now and then, but you also want them to be healthy. You get them like nice food and you give them lots of snuggles and you give them walks and fresh air and clean water. But if it was like an animal that you were kind of like, ooh, like I don't want this thing, like, I don't know, you're fostering a dog that you just didn't really like, you're not going to have that same level of detail and care. And that's how we want to start treating ourselves, is that when we love ourselves, we treat ourselves like someone we love.
Right. That's such a great point. And again, just having the self-awareness of what's actually going on physiologically, and then being able to apply that in reality and kind of marry the two. I think it's great. I love everything that you said today. I love the way that you were able to package it. So where can people go to get the free thing that you give away, and if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so hopefully we'll have it in the show notes below for my meditation audio. And then you can also
Yes.
find me on Perfect. You can also find me on my website, theconfidenteater.org, which is where I have my podcast, which is called Become a Confident Eater. And I also have all my socials on there. I have my Instagram. I have a free Facebook support group if anyone wants to write something longer for me and go back and forth, and I can give you some advice. And then if you're interested in doing a more deeper approach and working with someone to really tackle this for good, I have a full 6-month program called my Confident Eater program, where I work with women and men one-on-one to really help them stop binge eating and feel, quote, normal for good, which is where you really feel like you're in control around food and it's not taking over your whole life anymore.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amber, so much. This has really been a lot of information. And like I said, your presentation of it and kind of breaking it down and sort of the things maybe we've assumed, which you've kind of broken that and said, hey, let's look at it from this, science perspective and all of that. I think it's been such great information. I know my listeners will appreciate it. And if they want to work with you, we will put all of that in the show notes and have them be able to reach out to you. Thank you so much for coming on Everything's Messy. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for letting me come on today, Sarah. And I just want people to know too that, no matter what you're dealing with food, you're not alone, that there's someone out there who has been there too, has been in your shoes. You're really not as weird as you think. It's something a lot of people deal with, and to really find community around that so you can get out of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Amber.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Everything's Messy podcast. Whew, if you made it this far, give yourself a gold star or at least a nap. Honestly, if you showed up today and you were listening, you've already crushed it. I'm so grateful for you listening. If anything hit home, share it, tag me, write it on a sticky note. I don't care. Just don't keep all of this messy goodness to yourself. You can find me on Instagram at Everything's Messy Wellness or over at my website, everythingsmessywellness.com, where I've got resources, coaching, and probably a new rant about blood sugar or something that's just nonsense. It's all waiting for you. Check out my YouTube channel. I've got all of my podcast episodes up there. And I'm on X at Everything's Mess. Or if you just want to send me an email, Sarah at everythingsmessywellness.com. Look, until next time, hydrate, take no crap, and as always, keep it messy.